Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 18th chapter in the book of Matthew. Made all the way up to the first 14 verses. We're going to take this one from 15 all the way home through 25. In the 18th chapter opens with the disciples approaching the master with the question, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he answers the question by summoning a child, putting him up, and saying a few things, and he answers it in the 4th verse. Whoever then humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of the heaven. So the disciples needed a revolutionary reversal in their attitude and outlook. They were approaching him with arrogance, with pride, with selfishness. They had recently heard the announcement that he was going to die and be resurrected, and they were very grieved. And and not a whole lot of time had passed before they were squabbling amongst themselves, jockeying amongst themselves. There's a lot of rivalry between the disciples instigated by the events in the 17th chapter. The three, the inner entourage, Peter, James, and John, were privy to the transfiguration, and these 9 were stuck without him, and they couldn't cast out a demon. But the important thing is we can listen and learn from children, because without a childlike spirit, we cannot enter the kingdom of heaven, is his main plane. And whoever receives one is the same as one and the same as receiving himself. The least among us is the accurate reflection and encapsulation of how we treat him. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it is better for him that a millstone be hung around his neck, and that he be drowned in the depth of the sea. Verse 6, so children are innocent and pure, and anyone who corrupts them and orients their minds and their hearts and their eyes and their feet towards the life of sin, then woe unto you. You know, you deserve what you get, and it's going to be, you're going to wish that you had a millstone tied on your neck. It's going to be better off if you have a millstone, you have no chance of swimming, of saving yourself from drowning in the middle of the sea. So children are precious, and it is doubly sinful to corrupt children unto sin. Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks, for it is necessary that stumbling blocks come, but woe to that man by whom the stumbling blocks come. Stumbling blocks and temptations are necessary in order to have a victorious life. Without the obstacles to overcome, we could not be overcomers. So it is necessary that we be tempted, but temptation is not sin. It's only unless you succumb to temptation or you tempt others. So woe unto you if you are the ones. You are adding sin unto sin by spreading the sickness of sin, by tempting others to do sin. You know, putting them, bad influence, just being around one of those types. That's what you don't want to be, because it's going to be better for you if a millstone were hanging around your neck and you were tossed in the middle of the ocean. And he says, if your hand, foot, your eye, anything else, we shouldn't interpret this too literally. If we did so, it would be suggesting physical mutilation. So if your eyes are governed by lust, get rid of the lust in your heart, keep your eyes. But even if you can't control it, then you're better off cutting your hands off if you're a thief, cutting your tongue off if you're a liar, cutting your penis off if you're an adulterer. You're better off. You have a greater chance of making it to heaven if the organ or member or appendage of your body which causes you to sin is removed. So do what you have to do. If you can't get it out of your heart, get rid of the body parts themselves. Verse 11, for the Son of Man has come to save what was lost. Salvation was his mission and purpose. He entered into the human race in the world that he created in order to reconcile and build the bridge between a lost and estranged humanity with his heavenly Father, who is our heavenly Father, but he speaks to him as his heavenly Father in a special, unique way. But salvation was his mission and not judgment. Now when he returns, he's going to come with a sword in hand, but he came as the meek and mild-mannered lamb to seek and save that was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, would he not leave the 99 on the mountain, going to seek the one that is straying? Suppose this all depends on the quality of the shepherd, but the good shepherd, the one who provides the model, would go all the extra length. He would leave the 99 behind, knowing that they are secure in the fold, knowing that they know that they have every want, need, and provision provided for, so long as they don't wander astray, just to get the one who is lost, who has deviated to the broad path and road to destruction. He's going to scour the earth to find that one, and he's going to leave the 99 knowing that they're safe and sound in order to seek the one that is part of good quality shepherding. And if she should find it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over that sheep, a sheep than over 99 that did not go astray. It's a delight to behold that which was once lost. So just imagine losing a sheep is something. If you are a shepherd, you are emotionally and affectionately invested in their welfare and their survival and everything else. But to the joy of beholding one that was lost and is now found, there's nothing like it. Luke's 15th chapter also includes the parable of the coin, the woman who had 10 coins, and she found one in the house, and how great was her joy. Such how do the angels sing in heaven for the restoration of the repentance. And that's what a lot of the material we're about to cover is about. It opens with the main theme of the material we're about to cover is forgiveness, and it opens with instructions for internal church discipline. There's a lot of laxity with this stuff these days, but we do have the guidelines and the outlines to follow when such unpleasant necessities arrive. And then the 20th through the 30th, or the 25th, or the 20th through the 35th is the parable of the unmerciful servant, who though he was forgiven, he did not forgive. We'll get more on that when we get there. 15th verse, and if your brother sins against you, go and reprove him between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. He is talking to the disciples. The audience has not shifted. He's this train of thoughts which leads one place to the next, to the shepherd, to the children, and this is all the same discussion. And he's speaking about the obvious reality that if you coexist with someone is eventually going to sin against you, and when you do, to reprove them. This is a matter of delicacy, this is a matter of prudence, this is a matter of tact. You don't want to condemn the sinner, but create the environment in which the hostility of condemnation is not. We want to win them back. The aim is restoration, not communication. And so if there's a single sin, approach him alone, approach it in private. It's no one else's business. And if he hears you, if he listens to you, then you have gained a brother. You have laid the foundation successfully to build the bridge of forgiveness over one who has sinned against you. You cannot forget sin. You have to forgive it. You cannot just ignore it in your midst. So if someone does sin against you, this is what you have to do in the church. But if he does not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word might be established. This is embedded in the Old as well as the New Covenant. This prevented the presence of libelous accusations. It prevented anyone from saying anything about anyone else in a court of law. If it was they would know if it was not hearsay by they had 2 or 3 witnesses. So it was not enough for anyone to drag anyone into court of law without a witness if they were going to make a charge. And to start small. Don't gather and combine all the church all at once. Get 2 or 3 brothers that you trust, those who can teach who have the right spirit with you, and have them present there, and just give him the opportunity to explain himself once more and to reprove him by, he rejected you the first time, so if necessary, get 2 or 3 more, or 1 or 2 more, so 2 or 3, so you're the one. That all adds up. And if he refuses to hear them, say it to the assembly, and if he refuses even to hear the assembly, let him be like to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. He's talking about excommunication. Excommunication is the last resort, and it's evil necessity. You know, it's there because it needs to be there. There are some people who just have no response to the call for repentance. They cannot see their sin. They are selfishly tearing the assembly asunder with their sin. So sin has to be dealt with openly, honestly, forcefully, and face to face and directly, and just in every way, face it, confront it, and don't let it get the best of you. But if the sinner is going to persist, then treat him like the outcast, the disdained of society, the Gentiles and the tax collectors. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be having been bound in the heavens, and whatever you loosen on earth shall be having loosened in the heavens. Again I say to you, if that two of you agree on earth concerning any matter that they ask, it shall be done to them by my Father in the heaven. This is an extraordinary transfer of delegated authority that he's talking here. He's giving them the power of heaven to administer on earth, and Peter or the apostles could be trusted with this. So the problem is, once they died out, then sort of this deviation, corruption, and heresy, and ultimate apostasy, which finalized in the formation of the Catholic Church. But you know, with righteous and wise men, these powers are not overwhelming. And once more, if two agree, so by that principle, if you pray for the same thing, two in numbers, then you have the guarantee that he will listen, if not necessarily bring it to pass. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, there I am in their midst. This has unfortunately been reduced to a slogan. It's a vernacular in the language of Christianese or churchese. It's just been reduced to a platitude. So the thing that that gets neglected is together in my name. The name is the controlling element. You are not there to grab coffee or to socialize or gossip when you go. So it's really got to be in his name and in his spirit, and the name will not dishonor the name or the character or the will or anything else. But as long as two or three of you are there, then he is present. He exists in community. He's a communal creature. He exists three in one, Elohim, Father, Son, Spirit, and he exists in relationships. And the way that the manner in which we approach the congregational relationship, it does have parallels which are beyond my comprehension to explain right now. I understand it. I just can't explain it. But the important thing is that his presence makes the difference. It's not us. It's not anyone in the assembly who makes the difference. It's the presence of him that we are gathered for and enjoined together for. Then Peter came to him and said, Master, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? So in the church discipline episode, it appears to suggest that if a brother sin against you once, but why not forgive them if it doesn't involve, if you hasn't sinned against the church, if this is just personal matters. So, you know, the thing where someone says something that used to offend you, you just automatically forgive it. That's the mindset we have to have. But he perhaps thinks that the number 7 is a generous amount. The number 7 in the Hebrew numerology was indicative of divinity, purity, wholeness, and completion, and just the sum of all perfection. So 7 times would have been more than, if someone spits on your face 7 times and you forgive him, then golly for you, you are a forgiving person. But the Master calls us to the even more exalted standard of 490. Yahshua said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 7 times 7. That number 7, that was Peter talking. He did not say that. He just wants to say 70 times 70. So 70 more than Peter's generosity was the Messiah's generosity. Most Christians erroneously interpret this as just to suggest that there is to be no limitation on our forgiveness, but when you do add the numbers, the 70 times 70, that takes us from the land of Joshua to Jeremiah, there were 70 sabbatical cycles where the Hebrew nation was commanded to lay the land fallow so it could replenish itself. The soil would not get exhausted and would be good to go. Better in the long run, but for all 70 times, all 70 sabbatical years, they disobeyed it, and that was the length which determined the length of their exile. 400, the year 70 was also included in the length of their exile. But the 490 years terms, now this was not the only sin of the covenant nation that they had departed from and deviated and violated. They were in constant rebellion. So he's really long-suffering to even put up with that. So if someone spits on your face, Yahweh took 490 years of abuse from an entire nation of his people. How much more should we? Up to 490 times, anything after that, then, we got to, do what we have to do. Yeah, because of this, the kingdom of the heaven is like a certain man, a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. He's breaking out into a parable, and many of his parables are the nature of which revolve around the nature of the kingdom of the heaven, of heaven. So he's using a king as the human illustration to convey the spiritual truth. And this particular king wants to summon in all his debts with all his servants, the ones he had lent money on, he wanted to collect. So a parable is an instructive illustration which uses familiar imagery of everyday occurrences and commonly observed natural phenomenon as analogous illustrations to illuminate new didactic truths in a manner that is more lifelike than explicit precept or general abstraction. So that's what we witness here. That's what we have here, and it revolves around the nature of the kingdom, and more specifically as we read the forgiveness, because in some translations of the Lord's Prayer, what do we read? Forgive us our debts. When we sin, someone can forgive the debt, so we owe them something when we sin, but the forgiveness can cancel the debt and create a blank slate between friends, and it can do so between us and divinity. Joshua said to him, and when he had begun to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talentons. This is an astronomical sum. It is over the taxable revenue in the region of Galilee. Just to put a picture on it, it is in excess of millions of dollars. This is an incalculably large sum. Talents were the sum of the age, but I don't know. I don't know quite how to translate it, but the important thing is this was an inordinate debt, and he had it forgiven, and we're going to, in the next, eventually. But he was unable to pay. His master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. The practice of enslaving debtors or putting them in prison was something, it was permissible by the laws of Moses. Of course, they had limitations on how long they could own a slave. Every 7 years was a sabbatical cycle. That's when they released them from bondage. But it's in the book of Exodus that we read that this practice was permitted. But also debtors' prison were a thing as recently as the era of Charles Dickinson. That was the customary practice for people. Now, he was unable to pay. He had this incalculable sum of debt, and he had squandered it all. He had no means of livelihood. He had no way of paying this back. But he's being summoned, to have his children and his family go into slavery because of his irresponsible handling of a gift that had been given to him must have made him feel like a failure. So in his desperation, but how quickly the desperate become the oppressor is what we read. Verse 26, Then the servant fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I shall pay you all. He doesn't really mean that. There's no way that he can pay that. He's just asking for mercy and patience. But so moved is the master by this beggarly, pathetic, ostensibly humble servant. He's doing what he has to do to degrade himself in order to survive, but he is less than humble as soon as he is forgiven. So this he's asking, he gets more than he asks for. He's asked to spend the rest of his lifetime. He cannot make even a dent of a difference on satisfying this enormous, inordinate sum of money that he had, this debt he had accrued and acquired. But he's saying, just give me a year or two. I'll have it all for you then. It's basically what he's trying to say. And the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. So just like that, it was instantly canceled. This inordinate treasure of money, this small fortune, this incalculable sum of money is just forgiven because he is so moved with compassion. But this, beware, what I want to say in advance of as this parable unfolds is beware of making a God in your own image. All love, no wrath, all mercy, all forgiveness, no judgment. This is not the God of the Bible, but he is merciful in this instance, but he also resorts to wrath when he squanders the great debt that he had been forgiven to him. So we find this servant eventually, let's take it off from the 28th verse. So one would think that having this new lease on life, having this this debt, this astronomically high sum of money forgiven would give him a fresh look and just he would reciprocate the mercy and the forgiveness that had been given to him. But tragically, this was a bad seed. Something was wrong with this man. And that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver pieces, and he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, "Pay me what you owe." Now 100 silver pieces was about 100 days of wages of labor, so this was no small chunk. But in comparison to the 10,000, the millions of talents and dollars that this servant had just been relief from, who was he to reach out and grab him by the throat? He meant business. He was violent. He was in the least forgiving mood for one who had just been forgiven. So this servant, this unmerciful servant, this wicked servant, has the opposite mentality of what we read of in Luke 7:47. That is the scene where Yahshua is an invited guest of a Pharisee by the name of Simon, and a woman comes to him with long hair, just wiping his feet with oil and just lavishing him. And the thing he says to Simon is, this woman is a sinner, and he says, well, the greater the debt, the greater the love. The more you have to be forgiven from, the greater your love will be. So the sin of self-righteousness will disable that love that we have to so if we are forgiving, it is because we are loved, and if we love, then we will be forgiven. Then his servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I shall pay you all." He said the exact same thing, line for script, identicals in letter and word, to what he had said to the king, whose power was exceedingly greater than his, and whose wrath would be more cause to fear. But he abuses his authority. He has the leverage on the fact that even though this king had forgiven him of a debt, he had a legitimate case. He could drag him to prison, and that is precisely what he did. But he would not, and went and threw him into a prison till he should pay the debt. Standard practice in ancient times, if you could not forgive or satisfy a debt. Now, our modern capitalistic economy largely revolves around debt, and there are two means of enslavement, according to John Adams: the sword and debt. So just all these banks, they do enslave economically, certainly, many people. But this servant is cast in prison. This other servant's wife and children were about to be enslaved until he could pay off the debt. So he had cast them to a life of slavery, but it had all been forgiven. But then he takes him to prison, which is not quite as extreme or severe as slavery, but still. And when his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were deeply grieved, and came and reported to their master all that had taken place. The camaraderie of the servants, you're going to upset that when they see you do this to one of them, because that could have been them, and he would have done the same thing to them. So they are deeply grieved, and these servants aren't as selfless. They are team players. They all work together. They all got to get along. So it's, if this type of practice is acceptable in our family of servants, then of course they're going to be grieved, and of course they're going to come and report what went on to the master, and this master is going to recognize the culprit. The unforgiving was the forgiven. And when his fellow servant, then his master called him and said to him, "Wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt, seeing you begged me." So he's reminding him that he had just forgiven him, wiped the slate clean. He was ready to sell his wife and his children into slavery, and he said, "No, I'm moved by compassion. I see this beggarly, miserable, pathetic, humble, ostensibly servant begging for time, and I just said to let the whole thing go. This act of generosity, you have provoked my wrath. If you think that if I am all loving and no judgment, then you have it all wrong about God, like this servant had against his king. So we do not want to treat trivially the wrath and the retribution of God, which we invite by ourselves. If we want to be forgiven, then we have to be forgiving, because divine forgiveness is far too precious a commodity to squander on the unforgiving. And for our parts, we are to forgive regardless of the worthiness of the recipient. That's what the king did here. Look at him. Look at the character of the one he forgave, but he forgave him in spite of himself. So we cannot expect the same approach to forgiveness. The divine standard is not identical to the human one, and rightly so. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant, as I had also had compassion on you? So 2 ears heard the exact same message, the same words, the same plea, the same petition, and his was moved by compassion, and the other he had just been given this lavish amount of forgiveness and compassion and love, and to squander that and to treat it as so trivially, and just to go back out there and forget what could have happened to your family. You would have been enslaved for life, and your wife and children too. So, how's he going to treat you when he knows what he knows? And this, you picked on the wrong servant. If this servant wasn't so greedy, he would have known better than to grab him by the throat and just make a great show and display in front of his co-workers and fellow employees. And his master was wroth and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. This master was rightfully wroth. How could he not be to forgive someone of the debt that he forgave, and to find him strangling and imprisoning one whose own family you were so recently prepared to sell in slavery? So the worst thing than being in prison or being enslaved for a debt is to be tortured by it. So tortured until he should pay all that to do him. He's not going to get out of the torture chamber. Hell is eternal. Hell is torture. It is not physical torment. It begins as that. Your body instantly eviscerates in the lake of fire. But then it just goes. Your immortal soul dwells out and lingers in eternal solitude, the outer darkness. And that is torture. No one there, no one to comfort you, no one to talk to, no one to be with. Just you and your lonely self for all eternity in the outer darkness, disembodied. So also my Father of the heavens shall do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. He is not messing around. He is telling them the consequences of failing to be forgiving. You will not be forgiven. If you do not forgive others, you reap what you sow. It's the karmic boomerang that we can expect, because his justice is perfect and his justice is righteous and his justice is true. He is not going to forgive those who do not forgive others. And forgiveness is difficulty, but through his presence and through his power, the bridges of debts and forgiveness and just damaged relationships and everything else can be bridged through his power. So forgiveness is so counterintuitive and so unnatural to the natural man's mindset that it's literally a supernatural process start to finish. That is not to suggest that atheists cannot forgive. It is only to say that Christians can, must, and will forgive, regardless of the worthiness of the recipient. And if we do that, then we will be forgiven for our faults and defects, because guess what? We're not perfect too. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.